Hello everybody, Michael Tracy here. So some interesting news that hasn't gotten a ton of attention, but which could prove to be hugely significant. Does anyone recall the term CrowdStrike? Does that have meaning for anybody out there? CrowdStrike was the cybersecurity firm that the Democratic National Committee contracted to assess its servers in the wake of the purported Russian hack that took place sometime last year. So CrowdStrike was the first to attribute that purported hack or infiltration to Russian state actors. And there have been various critics in the cybersecurity realm who have raised questions as to the veracity of their findings and whether their examination was carried out comprehensively. And we later learned that the FBI was not given access to the servers that were purportedly subjected to this hacking initiative. The FBI has relied on the findings of CrowdStrike to formulate its conclusions, according to James Comey. He stated this. So part of CrowdStrike's case in attributing culpability to Russian state actors for the breach, which resulted in the dissemination of DNC emails, has been their claim that the same malware that had been used by Russian state actors to infiltrate Ukrainian field artillery units had also been used to carry out the DNC hack. So CrowdStrike in December released another report on this supposed infiltration of Ukrainian artillery apps by Russian state actors, because CrowdStrike claimed this had resulted in heavy losses to howitzers in the Ukrainian war in East Ukraine, or in the proxy war in East Ukraine between Russian separatists and Ukrainian forces. So the postulation that CrowdStrike made was that the Russian intelligence services used a similar malware infiltration scheme on these artillery apps in the Eastern Ukraine proxy war as they did on the DNC server infiltration. And CrowdStrike released in December a report to this effect. And according to the Voice of America, which has done some very good reporting on this, and is actually a U.S. government-funded media enterprise, so that's worth noting, but nevertheless, the finding of the Voice of America was that CrowdStrike falsified or fabricated or misrepresented data in their study that was derived from this British think tank, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, which tracks global conflicts. That think tank later accused CrowdStrike of misrepresenting their data and basically using it to further its own ends. Then we learned subsequently in another report by Voice of America that CrowdStrike ended up retracting key elements of the report tying this malware infiltration to Ukraine, to the Ukraine conflict. And why is that significant? It's significant because the head of CrowdStrike touted this Ukrainian support as bolstering the case that they are making for Russia having carried out this hack. So it may well be, we may all find out at some point, it's sure been a long time, but we may well find out at some point that somewhere along the line, Russian state actors were involved in the DNC hack. But the further along you get, the more doubt there is as to the veracity of that postulation, at least according to the publicly available evidence. So the crux of the case that Russia hacked the DNC has always been this CrowdStrike analysis. And it turns out that key elements of their analysis have proven utterly wrong or bogus or fabricated. And that is hugely significant. And yet I don't see much in the way of media attention to this. So the idea was that this X-agent malware was employed in the hacks, and then that left a finger in the DNC hacks, and then that was traceable to Russian actors because it leaves a fingerprint. But now we know that is false, because the malware fingerprint that was supposedly evident in these Ukrainian app infiltrations that are alleged is not there, or at least there's no evidence to suggest that Ukrainian app infiltration actually happened, which basically causes the whole story to come crashing down. Again, it's possible that evidence will surface that Russia did indeed carry out hacks, or the Russian government did at least employ actors to be involved in some step of the process to carry out these acts. But if CrowdStrike, which is the firm that was contracted by the DNC to furnish this story, if their findings are falling apart at a rapid pace, then that's grounds for skepticism. It's not grounds for coming up with any grandiose conclusions necessarily, but it's grounds certainly for skepticism. And this relates all back to problems that are inherent in this market for cyber attribution services, or cyber attack examination services. You know, it's sort of a hazily defined field, so there's not a great label for it, but there's a very good piece that was by Yasha Levine in The Baffler on this subject, and he writes, quote, "Cyber attack attribution can be exploited to support any politicized versions of events that one chooses." So if there's a pre-existing desire for attribution to further some narrative, then it's usually possible to retroactively come up with data points that bolster that narrative. And that may end up being the case with this supposed Russian hack of the DNC. Levine goes on to state that, CrowdStrike basically made a point of telling its clients, which is the DNC, so it was paid to assess these DNC servers. CrowdStrike essentially told the DNC what they wanted to hear, because they were their paying clients, so that would make sense. And then for FBI officials to just sign off on the findings of CrowdStrike without independently examining them, that at the very least, minimally, should suggest that the case for Russian hacking is not anywhere near airtight, or at least is far from being adequately substantiated. Given the attention that is assigned to this entire Russian hacking story and all its various elements and facets, you would think that this reporting by Voice of America, which would seem to undermine the core tenet of the theory that in the first place, would be receiving just headline news attention all across the board. Instead, the reaction to these stories has been muted, and it hasn't circulated as much as I would think it ought to. So I'm going to cite the links to those stories in the description box in this video. Read it for yourself, and let me know what you think. Anyway, have a great day.